As businesses around the world buckle in and brace themselves for the impact that the coronavirus pandemic will have on their operations, proper crisis management has become a necessity for company leadership. Yet only 54% of companies have a crisis plan in place. One of the most important actions that business leaders can take in the event of a global crisis event like COVID-19 is to quickly implement a plan to communicate company-wide updates. That's why Beekeeper prepared a general list of internal communication tips to help you effectively communicate with your team during a crisis situation. Download Beekeeper's free crisis communications checklist today at www.beekeeper.io/crisisavertedpodcast. That's www.beekeeper.io/crisisavertedpodcast. Welcome to the Crisis Averted Podcast, produced by CJ Media Solutions. I'm your host, CJ Arlotta. In this episode, I speak with Glenn Haussman, host of the No Vacancy podcast. During our conversation, he reveals how he found an opening in the hospitality industry to launch his podcast and opens up about some of his biggest failures in his professional career. He even shares tips on how you can launch a successful podcast. Just a quick note about the recording. Glenn and I recorded this conversation in mid-January of 2021. Feel free to send me your feedback at cj@cjmediasolutionsllc.com. Oh, and if you're listening to the Crisis Averted podcast on Apple Podcasts, please leave a rating, review, or both. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Glenn, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, man. You've been doing this show for a while now, and I've been waiting and waiting, but finally you've asked, so thank God.
Well, I'm glad you were able to join me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure, man.
So for listeners who aren't familiar with you, Glenn, mind telling us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Mostly I try to nap as much as possible and eat Whole Foods from time to time.
Right.
But really, I've been a hotel industry journalist for 25 odd years at this point, and I absolutely love the hospitality business, talking about the hospitality business and educating, empowering, and entertaining people out there.
What do you love about the hospitality business?
Nicest people ever. As far as, well, it's not that I've been in that many industries, but I used to be, when I first started out my career, right? I was in the entertainment industry as a young journalist. And turns out celebrities suck and people are not nice in that industry. Go over to hospitality, man, everybody's so dang nice. And it's so awesome to be around those people. Everyone really has much more love about them. So it really works well for me.
What made you decide to go out on your own and start your own business?
As we are recording this, it is basically my 5th anniversary of starting my own business. And it was really important for me to go ahead and do that at that particular juncture in my life. I think I was running up against a couple of few type of different things. Number one, the boss that I had at the time was starting to put less and less emphasis on the stuff that I love to do. I was much more interested in me doing things that didn't really bring me passion in my life. Number two, I was 45 years old. I'm starting to get a little bit old. No, nothing personal to older people out there that are older than me. But in your career world, I've been in it. I was at it for a very, very long time. I saw decade after decade, once people started to hit 50 or so, suddenly they weren't appreciated anymore. Suddenly they weren't needed anymore. Suddenly they were gone. And I didn't want to be one of those people. I wanted to control my destiny. And I also wanted to be able to prove to myself that I could do it, that I didn't want to have any missed opportunities in my life that I would regret. We all have plenty of regrets, but I wanted to make sure that this was not going to be one of them. So 5 years ago, I held my breath and took the jump.
What were some of the things you didn't enjoy doing at previous publications?
I just love being creative. I just love going out and having drinks with people and talking to people and interviewing people and getting to know people, and set against the backdrop of amazing places and awesome experiences. Because really, fundamentally, that's really what life is all about. We want to collect all these incredible experiences. I've always tried to live my life with the idea of when I'm in the old age home in that rocking chair, I'll have lots of great stories to look back on if I could remember them. But it's really important that you have experiences in life. So I've tried to find a way in my career to wrap the whole notion of experiences and living life to its fullest with a career.
What were some of the steps that you decided to take when starting the company? Did you have a business proposal in mind?
No, I had an idea. The type of company that I was going to do is not one where I needed to put up together a whole business plan, and I'm just way too lazy for that sort of thing. But I did detect that there were changes in media, and I knew based on all of those things that I had mentioned before that I needed to make some significant change within my life. That I knew what to do because there was an opening in the market. All of my competitors out there, while I love them and respect them, I didn't see them in moving in the same direction that I wanted to move into. I love podcasting. I'm so glad that you're doing this. I got involved in it 10 years ago when I had my old job, and I knew that that was going to be the way that people would want to communicate. And I also knew that video was going to become more important over time. Who would have known, stroke of luck, how important it has become in just the last year on the back of the COVID crisis? But I saw these things coming. Plus, I saw the world of content marketing beginning to blossom. And I knew that that was going to be the future of the way that people communicated with guests, because with customers, because after all, people start to become desensitized to all the advertising that's out there. They don't notice it in the same ways. So I wanted to be able to leverage the trends as I saw them. So it was the perfect opportunity at the perfect moment with the perfect direction that I wanted to take my career.
What were some of the initial challenges you faced when starting your business?
Initial challenges. Well, the number one challenge was quitting a job and making sure I had a little bit of income, and also a plan for success. Not necessarily, again, like a big business plan, but something in my head that I knew would be important to try to follow, while also remaining flexible and taking cues from the marketplace and where my successes and failures were to be able to adapt on the way. But to start, those first few months, the months prior to getting in there and starting this thing, I was nervous because I had to find some sort of work. I wound up having like one client and one paid speaking engagement. One of the things that I love to do is public speaking engagements. And until COVID, I was doing that pretty regularly. So that was one of my goals with the company as well. So I had a few of those things in place and just took the leap of faith, now or never. And had to have the trust in myself to say, you can do it. No matter what, you can do it. And I tried.
And what about with podcasting? You said you started that about 10 years ago. How have you seen that industry evolve? And I guess what were some of the initial obstacles you faced when starting podcasting?
10 years ago, it was wide open and it was great to start to play with it. The biggest obstacles were not necessarily the ones with technology, although the technology 10 years ago is much more complicated. And I used to have to carry this giant box of stuff around with me.
Right.
Now it's completely different. But the biggest challenge was nobody knew what a podcast was. Nobody knew how to find a podcast. Nobody knew how to download or even listen to a podcast, even with it in its nascent stages within the Apple ecosystem, for example. So that was probably the toughest thing. But it was also a blessing for somebody that was involved in the trade media side because it gave me a new tool in my arsenal. So while there were challenges, it was not that big of a deal. It was they were almost mitigated by the fact that maybe nobody was actually listening to the shows, but the PR people that I work with on a regular basis, giving their executives a way to express themselves in ways they hadn't before, well, that wound up being very beneficial to everybody. The executive absolutely loved doing it because it was fun, it was new, it was fresh. The PR people got a lot of credit, and I got some great interviews, but more importantly, a lot of practice in understanding how to communicate in this particular forum.
So what are some of the do's and don'ts of podcasting then, Glenn?
Uh, all right. Do practice all the time. Do play improv. Let me think this through. I want to be very serious about this because this is really important. Everybody gets kind of caught up. You have to have a passion. You have to have a mission in life and what you're going to talk about. That's why I like what your whole theme is: crisis averted. It's just stories of how people capture their true potential, right? How they're dealing with the things that come with their way in life. And that's your passion. My passion is talking about the hospitality industry and all the different facets that go within it. So number one, you have to know your topic. It has to be something that you love. You have to be curious. You have to be inquisitive. You have to be somebody that wants to have great conversations with people and listen. And that gets me to the point that I just hinted at: improv. Improv in comedy, it's really about listening. And there's a whole thematic of yes and listening to what the person says, accepting that, and then adding to that. So one of the hardest things that I think people have to understand is they really need to listen and respond. You need to get out of a sense of rigidity that you are going to ask these questions come hell or high water. You have to be flexible. You have to be in the moment. You have to be ready to let the conversation create itself and you be part of the conversation as opposed to you thinking you have to drive the conversation to a specific way. For me, ultimately, the most successful conversations I have, be it on a podcast or if I'm on stage doing a panel at a major hotel industry event, I want all of us to get somewhere that none of us expected when we first sat down and I said hello, right? It's
Great
all
advice.
about that sense of discovery, right, CJ? It's and that's why I say it's being in the moment and listening and allowing it to develop. So that's another thing. On top of that, you have to be pretty darn disciplined, and you really have to know how to have a conversation with people in the sense of being present, again, with the listening, the right type of questions to ask, do your homework to know who they are. I don't do any homework, but I've been in this sector for 25 years at this point, so I don't worry about that.
Is that really the key to your success when it comes to podcasting? There are, you have some people that say do a lot of homework, and the same thing in journalism. There are some people who do a lot of homework when they do either presentations or podcasting or speeches. And then there are some people who, they know the field so well that they go in there without any, haven't done any research whatsoever.
Right. Well, I'm very fortunate in the sense that I come from a quote unquote journalism background. Right. So I've spent years and years and years and years and years before podcasting even came up having conversations with people. Right. So I learned all of those critical skill sets while also learning about the incredible hospitality industry. And again, all of those little disciplines within the hospitality industry. So after my 10,000 Malcolm Gladwell hours put in, I had a good understanding of how all of that works. Plus, I've been around now long enough that I know most of these people at this point, know what their companies are, and the homework has been done instead of last week or last night over the last couple of decades. That being said, there are instances where I feel that I need to take a few minutes to collect my thoughts and try to create a focus for a particular interview.
How do you go about picking topics for your podcast, and how do you go about picking guests? Do you schedule guests in advance? How far in advance? Do you sometimes swap them out depending on what the news of the day is?
All right. So we do a show called No Vacancy Live, and I do it with Anthony Melchior. You guys might know him out there. He was the host of Hotel Impossible on the Travel Channel, which you will yell at me if I don't tell you all this. On Discovery Plus right now, so you watch all episodes on there. But we do the show every day at noon on the internet, and it started out, CJ, in the right as the Corona crisis started. The virus started closing everything down. Anthony and I found ourselves at home, and I had just gotten access to LinkedIn Live a couple of months prior. So I'm like, let's go on, let's figure it out. We just started talking to people every single day, but then it developed into a real show. So at this point, we go 4 days a week for an hour a day. We typically have one guest a day, and we're booking those guests 6 to 8 weeks in advance, depending on who they are and what their availability is. That being said, we also try to remain flexible for things that are happening. And we do have instances, CJ, where we have to switch around guests depending on what is happening within the market. There's also sometimes somebody gets sick. Today, we had on somebody named Jerry Inzarello in the hospitality industry. He's big time. He knows every single person. Like just on the conversation we had today, he dropped that he knows several members of the incoming Biden cabinet. He knows Stevie Wonder for decades. Oprah Winfrey is one of his friends, and he works for and is personal friends with His Majesty of Saudi Arabia, whatever. And he's running their tourism now for that nation. So.
Wow, talk about name dropping.
Right, exactly. So, what did I just do? Was that name dropping by proxy? I don't know.
I think so, yeah.
Right? Because I guess ultimately we're trying to say, hey, we get good guests. So,
right.
So essentially, Jerry had to cancel last week because he had to go to dinner with the princess of Saudi Arabia. So we had to scramble and find another guest. We moved somebody up. So we had to be very flexible in what we're going to be talking about. We have to be very in the moment. We have to anticipate what's going to happen and try to create subject matter ahead of everybody else by anticipating the market. I've been in this business, again, long enough that I have a good sense of how it all works. I've been through up cycles, down cycles, down cycles, and I kind of have my own understanding of how I believe things are going to happen and what's going to come next. And therefore, it allows me to understand what those important stories are going to be and the ones that are connect best with our viewership.
And you talked a little bit about this before, but how important is consistency to your success, and how long did it take for you to get into a rhythm?
All right. So when it comes to podcasting, it's going to take a while to get into a rhythm. So you need to figure out other ways to be able to learn this discipline so you're not doing all of the learning on the microphone. For me, in my position as a journalist, I knew that I would need to start doing speaking engagements. I knew that I needed to start hosting panels. And there was a time when I did not have this particular skill set. I was not able to communicate in this particular medium that now has become very natural to me. So I really had to work a long time to do it. I was also an adjunct professor at NYU, and I had to speak in front of students for 3 hours at a time, a couple of days a week for a number of years. That really prepared me for this. But when it comes to the podcasting medium in general, it does take a little while, and you have to be consistent. You have to figure out what your tone is going to be. You ultimately have to figure out how to be yourself. If you can't be genuinely yourself, you're going to be putting up arbitrary roadblocks for yourself in your ability to communicate through the podcasting medium. Because the more you could just be natural, the more you could be organic, the more you could get away from all of those things I think I should be doing, or a podcast host would do this, so I'm going to do that. All of that is just going to hold you up. It's just going to prevent you from that flow that you're trying to get into. Because in anything in life, you're really trying to hit that flow zone where you almost have an out-of-body experience, CJ, where you're not actually doing the work, you're kind of channeling it, and it's kind of happening on its own, right? You know that feeling, right? Sure. So you have to try to be yourself as much as possible and create the right psychological conditions before you go on air, so you can be free. You can tap into the ultimate essence of who you are. I know that sounds really super crazy hokey, but if you put up those arbitrary barriers, you're just not going to have the ability to connect with your audience in the way that you really want to.
So how do you get in the zone before you go on and do a LinkedIn Live with Anthony or any other podcast that you do? Are there any rituals that you do or anything like that?
None. Today, none.
Yeah.
None now. But that's only because I've spent a long time learning the skill to going from 0 to 60 in a snap. Right. So I was exhausted before you turned on the microphone. Right. I had a long day. I was up at 6 this morning. I did some exercise. I did my show. I did this. I'm kind of emotionally done, but I now know how to bring it when the microphone is on. And as soon as you hit stop on that recording device, I'm going to shut off again, right? So that's a skill that I could bring. But all of you have to figure out what are the conditions that will get you to that particular place. You all know it. You just have to figure out, you have to open your eyes, open your ears, all of your senses in order to really think about and make the mental recognition of all of the things that have had successes for you in the past, and try to create some sort of program that will bring you to that place. Early on, CJ, one of the things I would do, but going backstage, and I still like to do it if I'm doing keynote presentations and stuff, is I'd need to stretch and breathe, because I want to open up my body so I could just move around and not be stiff, right? It makes you feel better to just stretch and stuff like that. Have a quiet minute. Another thing that I find is valuable, turn off the cell phone X amount of minutes before you go on air. Half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, whatever works for you. Because, CJ, There are going to be times where just before you can hit that record button, something bad is going to happen. It's going to throw you off your game.
Right.
Don't
Someone's going to
allow
send you a
that.
text message or a phone call, an email.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't let that happen to you, because all you're doing, again, is putting up blockades to your own success. So you have to find all of your triggers, all of the things that will prevent you from reaching the flow zone, and remove those or mitigate them as much as possible prior to doing your recording.
Do you remember one of your biggest failures when being on stage, whether it was a panel or a keynote? And if so, what did you learn from it?
Yeah, man. I'm glad you asked. We
right.
all have some miserable, horrific, terrible failures in life, right?
Yeah.
So let me break this into two things. One, the first one isn't necessarily a failure, but when I first started doing hosting on stage, I would need to take a lot of notes and stuff like that, and I felt like I failed at it every time because I wasn't able to listen to people as much, right? So I always came off the stage with, I did okay, but I had a sense of failure because I wasn't creating an environment for me to really work better. At some point, I learned to not prepare at all before panels and just be in the moment and ask questions. So that was helpful. But for real failures, I've had, I was hosting a game show once at a conference, and the game show technology stopped working after like the second of 20 questions. And every time they would try to do it, it would get fucked up. And I had to continue to try to buy time and stuff like that. And before you knew it, everybody was throwing dessert items at me. And it really, these hotel conferences, because there's open bars, things can really devolve pretty quickly and go in the wrong direction. But it wasn't like, hey, Glenn, you suck. It was just more like, boo, this whole thing is happening, right?
Yeah.
So I knew not to take it personally. So, but while it was a great failure in terms of how I wanted the event to go and how I perceived that the event was going to go, it was actually, to me, a victory, because I learned that stuff can go horrifically long on stage. And anytime something goes wrong, I've dealt with it. And now I almost have learned to embrace when things go horribly wrong on stage that are out of my control in particular, because if you can react quickly, if you could respond and just keep going and show a good fight, the audience will love you even more. So when things go really south, you have a chance to be more successful than you ever can. But last story I'll tell you is I was hosting an event, main stage of a brand new conference. And the conference had a whole dynamic to it besides the general session, where it was going to be a giant showroom where all of these different hotel concepts were going to be shown. When you typically go to a trade show, it's like you go to the guy that sells the locks, you go to the guy that sells the safes, you go to the guy that sells the beds, you go to the guy that sells the furniture. Instead, there were something like 30-something fully created guest room suites. And getting it organized and put together was the biggest cluster F that I've ever experienced in my entire life. The event was doomed from the start. And I had to go on stage and do a panel. I had back-to-back panels. It was going to be something like an hour and a half to 2 hours. I had to be on stage. But they couldn't get the showroom finished. They couldn't get the showroom open. And they were like, you got to keep going. You got to keep going. Meanwhile, the audience, which had hundreds of people in it, are starting to leave one at a time, five at a time, and it starts to get lower and lower. And they kept making me stretch these panels. By the time I brought out the final panel, and mind you, these people came because they trusted me. They got in an airplane. They disrupted their lives to come to talk to me because I put my reputation on the line that this was going to be successful for them. They come on stage. There's like 20 people left in the room from hundreds and hundreds of people. And these are like top tier hotel franchising guys, right? And some of them are people that I've been chasing for years, and I finally got them. And there was no audience for them. And I'm stuck on this stage trying to not make it look as if this is not the worst moment of my entire professional career when I'm on stage. It was horrible. It was abysmal, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
How long were you on stage for in total?
4 hours.
Oh my God.
It was a nightmare, a
Wow.
nightmare. I could do 4 hours of content,
Sure.
but it was the negativeness that was floating in the air that made it so challenging. So it wasn't just stretch, stretch, stretch. It was that feeling of death lingering in the air, right? All you wanted to do is get the hell out of there.
Did you learn anything from a reputation management perspective from that moment where, you said you had people that came to the conference to see you that trusted you,
Right.
and you felt like it was a big failure and your name was on it. So did you learn anything from that with whether, it was, trusting people you work with, or, if there were you put any processes in place after that?
Well, the problem was I knew it was going to be a mess going into it because from the onset of the creation of this project, what the CEO of the company said, I never believed was going to be feasible. I thought the idea in itself was fantastic, but from the beginning, I knew that the way they wanted to execute that portion of it was going to be a complete failure. And it was not my area of the company, and I could not do anything about it. So I could only deal with my side of it. So I really got trapped between a rock and a hard place. But what I learned is that people could be forgiving. I apologized to them. I took responsibility for it. I apologized for it, like I just said. I made it known that I was the one that created this situation for them, and it was meaningful. And then I went ahead and I said, look, I'm sorry about this, but what if I did X, Y, Z to help you with, your visibility here or whatever it might be there. So I got through it, but it was not a good situation, but I did learn a lot about humanity.
I mean, that's big. A lot of people don't like taking responsibility for anything anymore.
No, it's much easier to just blame others and push it aside. So I mean, if we all hold ourselves accountable to a high standard, then we're going to do so much better in life. It's also a lot less stressful way to live, CJ.
Yeah.
I mean, I just had a disagreement with somebody recently, and we didn't talk for a couple of days, and it was frustrating because all I wanted to do is move past that moment so I wouldn't have to feel any heaviness. There's enough heaviness going on in the world right now that we don't need to do things to ourselves to make our journey through this life even heavier.
Yeah, everybody is so focused nowadays on being right, right? That's everybody's goal. And instead, people should really just open up and listen and try to have a conversation instead of always trying to prove that they're right about something. Try to find out why you might be wrong about something. Look at it that way.
Right. Yeah. Well, nobody wants to do any research anymore.
Right.
And I think this takes it back to the point that I think that makes me, dare I say, good at podcasting is that curiosity factor. I don't think people are curious enough anymore. They don't want to just investigate. I'm very blessed that I have two sons that are curious. They watch YouTube videos for good. They watch to learn, right? And every night at the dinner table, we have great conversations because they're curious and they're self-starter learners. And I wish that more people were like that in our society, because the end result from people not wanting to learn is just repeating back talking points from whatever organization they're listening to without any concept to whether or not those talking points are based in any sense of reality or not.
Can curiosity be learned, Glenn, or is that something that people are naturally born with?
I think I was naturally born with it, but I know a lot of people that are not. But I don't know if it could be learned or not because I just am. But maybe, CJ, it's just like other things in life that we have to learn. I watch my kids learning how to play musical instruments. The beginning, the first few years is not fun at all. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. But at some point, it becomes easier. The weight and the struggle is lifted, and it just becomes more of who you are. And I try to do that. My method in life has always been not to try to take on a lot of things at once. Try to learn one new thing and add it to my life. And then once I beat that down and it's become part of who I am fundamentally as a human being, and by that, I mean, I don't have to think about it. I don't have to force it to happen. It's just part of my life, kind of like the way you all brush your teeth and wash your face, right? It just is. So I try to add one thing. I always have one thing that I'm working on to improve myself in whatever way that I think that would be. So make that, if you're not curious, make that what your one thing. Put the effort in, learn the behavior, and then all of a sudden the behavior will become part of you and it'll become easier and easier over time until it's just a natural inclination.
Glenn, I want to talk a little bit about the COVID-19 pandemic. How was your business impacted by it? I know, you have various revenue streams for your business. You mentioned before that, you used to go to a lot of the hospitality conferences and do panels and speaking gigs. So what happened when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and how'd you pivot?
I did not avert a crisis, CJ. I
Right.
got I got hit by an 18-wheeler. I had an amazing year planned for 2020. I was raring to go. Things were just successful. I just had an amazing advertising deal from a hotel brand that I was very excited to be working with, and it was very, very symbolic of where I thought I was. It was all about the hard work that I had put into at that point 4 years about building this business. It was about how I worked nights, how I worked weekends, how I traveled 125 nights plus a year, sacrifices away from my family to try to create something from nothing. And then when this crisis hit, CJ, I lost 80% of everything in 24 hours.
Wow.
All my speaking gigs went away, consulting gigs went away, advertising clients went away, sponsors for several of my podcast series went away, and I was in the thick of it. I didn't know what the hell I was going to do, man.
Well, how did you end up coming out of it? Did you watch? I mean, we're in a spot right now where, I remember back in the beginning of the pandemic as well. There was, a few week period where nobody had any idea what was going on, and that's when you started picking up and doing a lot more LinkedIn Live events, and people were coming on and trying to figure out what was going on. I was hit too in my portfolio on the hospitality side, of course. Everybody was very, confused and trying to figure out what the heck was going on. So what were some of the steps that you decided to take to kind of move forward and figure out your path forward?
Well, I think the first step was just accepting my situation and having the confidence in myself that I would be able to figure it out, right? Because the bottom was yanked out from under me. Bottom was yanked out from a lot of people. And I don't want to mitigate or minimize what other people's experiences were. We've all had a lot of very different experiences. And I got to tell you, CJ, in some way, because it was communal, it probably lessened the overall pain of the moment happening, right?
Sure.
Because it wasn't, Glenn, you suck. It was, there's this virus came and it's destroyed our entire industry, right? So there was a camaraderie of commiseration in our business. And like we talked about before, I started going on air live every day. And oh my God, we started getting, I'd ask some of my friends to come on, and I've been around long enough that they've got, a lot of these people have fancy titles now. And we just got the most amazing guests. And they opened up and they were honest about what they were going through. This was the hardest moment in everybody's careers. And they were coming on this show every day and being honest. And we just started going with that. Over time, the flavor of the program changed.
Yeah.
And I started to realize, oh my God, maybe we could make this a business. So probably last summer in about August, we started to feel things were changing. And we're doing this live show. I'm starting to do more video-based content now. And I very rarely do just an audio podcast only anymore. It's all video based. So I pivoted that way, and I'm finding new opportunities in the market to rebuild my business. I actually wound up hosting virtual events for a couple of hotel companies for their annual conferences, as well as a major hotel industry association. And one of the companies, not only did I host stuff for them, CJ, but because I have all of this experience now producing live events on the internet, they hired me to consult on that too. So, again, you have faith in yourself. And now I've managed to inadvertently build something, reinvented myself at the same time, given myself confidence that if I could get through this, I could get through absolutely anything that's going to come my way. And I think I'm now better positioned for success in the future than I ever have been before. And probably I will wind up in the end having more achievements than I would have had the coronavirus not forced me to reevaluate everything and start from scratch. It's crazy to think that, but anytime I've been fired, anytime that I've had a real hit in the face, things have always gotten better. It's just a matter of how we respond to the situations and deal with it with dignity and move on than anything else.
Yeah, I remember in the beginning of the pandemic when you were doing those LinkedIn events, and I think I remember telling you people are going to remember this
Right.
on the other side of this because you were really bringing everybody together, something that was in real time. And it's interesting you mentioned the executives being honest because I think initially nobody wanted to talk with the media. They didn't
And
really
there's
know what
still
to
some that don't. And I know who you are and you know who you are.
right. But everybody was holding back. They were hesitant. But then they got to a point where, like you said, everybody's in the same boat. The whole industry, it just hit a wall. So
Right.
there's nothing to be afraid about. Everybody is in the same spot. It's okay to talk. And people were genuinely learning from each other, like you said. I mean, you go to these when we used to go to these conferences, the panels we go on, a lot of the same topics, and you hear a lot of the same talking points
Right.
over and over and over again. And so everybody was put into a situation they've had never been in before, and they had to learn from each other. So it was a really totally different experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's why I have really enjoyed doing it. Not, I didn't enjoy that people were suffering, but I enjoyed the feeling that we were creating a sense of community. And I'll tell you what, CJ. I mean, I do think people think of me differently now, and I'm very proud of the hard work that I put in this year and having that, faith. And somehow it's all seems to be working out.
Do you miss the live events?
Oh my God, more than anything. TJ, I would give anything, almost anything to like have a flight delay or,
Right.
or,
Spend
or
24 bucks on a Bud Light at JFK Airport.
right, man. I really miss that part of my life. It was great to have all of those adventures and be with all those people. But again, let's look at what the world's dealt us. Let's look at the positive. I've gotten to be home with my family all of this time in ways that we never would have had in our busy, crazy world. It's been more intimate. It's been more special. It's been something that's we're going to remember forever. And I think it's brought me closer to my entire family. Instead of me feeling like a drive-by divorced dad coming in for the weekends, I've been here and I've been, participating in this family more. And that has been in itself priceless. And now to be able to create a new business where I'm talking to you from my home studio and be able to do all of these things, I'm really starting to find a healthy work-life balance. And while I still want to travel as much, I'm not sure I want to travel 125 plus nights a year anymore, but I still do want to get there on the road and have really bad conference food and wear a badge and have really long walks to go places.
Right. What are your thoughts on live events this year in the hospitality space? I know a lot of people want to do them. I think that was the earliest one in May. I think they have something set up. Do
Yeah.
you think we're
The
going to,
Hunter conference is taking place in May. My buddy Craig, who does the California Lodging Investment Conference, just decided to push his to virtual and then do a in-person event in third quarter. It looks like everybody's looking for third and fourth quarter. I think maybe at this point, third quarter might be a little too soon. At least early third quarter, but I really don't. I really don't know. Every single time I make a prediction, it's later than it is. This has been such a mess. I would say, CJ, let's have this conversation about when I think stuff's going to come back in a month with a new, as we're recording this, a new administration here in the United States is taking over in a week from now on January 20th. They will probably make a lot of changes that will facilitate us moving forward at a better pace, in my belief, and also seem to create some sort of national consensus about how we're going to get through the rest of this crisis. Once we have that clarity, I think we'll be able to make better predictions.
what are some of your business goals for 2021?
Number one, don't screw up everything from 2020. I suffered enough last year and I don't want to suffer again. Number two, stop being penny wise and pound foolish. I've made it through a crisis, and I have made a promise to myself to make investments in this business that are going to free me up from things that I should not be doing so I could better focus on things that I should be doing. Number 3, I'm going to be introducing brand new programming, stuff that's different, stuff that's going to bring me more joy. And number 4, be sure I stay ahead of any of the trends that are going on in the marketplace so I can continue to deliver great content.
Glenn, where can people find you if they're interested in learning more about you and listen to your podcast?
Yeah, we do No Vacancy live every day. If you want to get the podcast, please check it out. No Vacancy with Glenn Haussman on iTunes, Google Play, wherever you're going to go find your podcasts. Of course, you could subscribe to our Sunday night newsletter by texting the word hotel to 66866. Simple enough, the word hotel to 66866. Then, of course, we got novacancynews.com. Friend me on LinkedIn. I'd love to meet you over there. Like us on Facebook, like us on LinkedIn, watch us on YouTube, subscribe on YouTube. CJ, I think I did all the shameless plugging I can.
Sounds good, Glenn. I appreciate it. And thanks for coming on the podcast today.
My pleasure. And thanks for letting me talk. I never get to talk in my own show. I'm always letting the guests talk. So this has been an absolute honor. Thanks, man.
Right. I appreciate it, Glenn. I'll talk to you soon.
Yep.